You wouldn't expect a crime story to start with on the set of a Western, but in the early 1900s, that's exactly how one of the most unusual intersections of crime and entertainment unfolded. The man at the center of it was Al Jennings, a former lawyer turned train and bank robber whose life had already been stranger than fiction. By the time cameras rolled in 1908, Jennings had lived through multiple shootouts, served time in prison, been pardoned by the President of the United States, and somehow found himself standing in front of a film crew reenacting one of his own crimes for the big screen. Jennings's early years gave no hint of where he'd end up. Born around 1863 in Virginia, he studied law and became a practicing attorney in Oklahoma Territory. The trouble that would change Al Jennings's life began when his older brother, Ed Jennings, got into a heated dispute with another attorney named Temple Lee Houston. The tension between the two men had been simmering for months, and in 1895, it exploded into violence. During a confrontation, Houston shot and killed Ed Jennings. Houston was later tried for the killing but acquitted on grounds of self-defense. For Al, the verdict felt like a deep injustice, and it marked the moment he began drifting away from his legal career and toward a path that would lead him far outside the law. He soon drifted toward the outlaw circles that roamed the frontier, and by the late 1890s, he had joined up with a gang specializing in robbing trains and banks across Oklahoma and Texas. These weren't the gentleman bandit robberies of dime novel romance. Jennings and his crew often struck quickly, using firearms to intimidate passengers and tellers. He later claimed in his memoirs that he never intentionally killed anyone, but his career was violent by nature. In 1897, Jennings and several gang members were captured after a failed robbery attempt. He was sentenced to life in prison, but saw that sentence reduced to 5 years. Even more remarkably, he received a full pardon from President Theodore Roosevelt in 1904, a political move that allowed Jennings to re-enter society legally free of his past convictions. When Jennings walked out of prison, he didn't fade quietly into obscurity. He embraced his notoriety, giving interviews, speaking about his life as an outlaw, and even positioning himself as a reformed man with lessons to share. Around this time, the fledgling film industry was beginning to experiment with dramatizing real events. Westerns were becoming popular, and the idea of filming a real outlaw playing himself was too good for producers to resist. In 1908, Jennings stepped in front of the camera for a silent short titled The Bank Robbery. The production was simple by modern standards, static cameras, outdoor sets, and no sound, but the hook was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. Jennings wasn't just acting. He was reenacting a robbery similar to those he'd actually committed in his outlaw days. This wasn't some studio script dreamed up in an office. It was based on real methods, with the man who had lived them calling the shots. On set, Jennings dressed in period-appropriate outlaw gear, wide-brimmed hat, gun belt, boots, and led his gang into a small-town bank. The film showed them rushing in, brandishing pistols, intimidating clerks, grabbing stacks of cash, and then making a quick getaway. The cinematography was basic, but there was an undeniable authenticity in how the scenes played out. Even without sound, you could sense the realism in Jennings's movements. He knew how to hold the gun, how to position himself in the doorway, how to bark silent orders to his men. It was the kind of accuracy you couldn't fake, because it came from experience. For audiences of the time, this was an absolute novelty. Movies were still a young medium, and seeing a man who had actually committed the crime portray it on screen blurred the line between documentary and fiction. Newspaper coverage at the time leaned into the spectacle, often playing up Jennings's outlaw past as a selling point. The public reaction was a mix of fascination and moral unease. Some saw it as an entertaining curiosity, an outlaw turned actor. Others questioned whether it was appropriate for a man to profit, even indirectly, from depicting the very crimes that had once terrorized communities. For law enforcement and politicians, it created a strange problem. There weren't yet established laws about criminals benefiting from their notoriety, what would later be called Son of Sam laws in the US. Jennings wasn't being paid for robbing the bank this time. He was being paid for acting. And because his conviction had been pardoned, he was technically in the clear. Still, the optics were tricky. This was, after all, the early 20th century, when law and order campaigns were pushing back against the romanticizing of outlaw life. Jennings himself didn't shy away from the attention. He leaned into the role of celebrity bandit, using the film to build a kind of brand. Over the next few years, he published books, went on lecture tours, and even ran for political office, including a run for governor of Oklahoma in 1914. His pitch to voters was a mix of charm, redemption narrative, and self-promotion. He didn't win, but he stayed in the public eye for decades, occasionally appearing in more films and continuing to tell stories from his outlaw days. The bank robbery is now considered a piece of cinema history, not because of its technical quality, it's rudimentary even for its time, but because it represents one of the earliest intersections of true crime in Hollywood. Long before streaming docudramas, true crime podcasts, or TV reenactments, there was Al Jennings, stepping into the spotlight to perform his own past. The footage, grainy and silent, has survived in archives, and watching it today is still unsettling. You can't escape the fact that the man in the frame had actually lived the events he was portraying. It's part Western fantasy, part confession, part marketing stunt. The story didn't end in scandal or renewed criminal charges. Jennings lived until 1961, dying at the age of 98 in California. By the time he passed away, the outlaw image he had once embodied was softened into that of an eccentric old-timer from the Wild West. Hollywood had moved on to more polished portrayals of outlaws, but Jennings's unusual role remains a reminder of how the line between reality and performance has always been blurrier than we think. Even now, the bank robbery raises the same kinds of questions it did in 1908. Does reenacting a crime glorify it? Does it give a platform to someone who once caused real harm? Or does it serve as a kind of historical artifact, preserving a first-hand account in a way no second-hand retelling could? Whatever the answer, Jennings's performance remains a one-of-a-kind moment in the long, tangled history of Los Angeles, Hollywood, and the stories they choose to tell.